Hi there, Eric McRae here, coming in with another video today for my anime and gaming commentary channel. And today's video is something I'm very excited about. I'm going to be covering a series that is actually quite different towards what you would see normally coming out of the typical Japanese culture invigorated into manga and anime. And in this case, what we're covering is none other than Afro Samurai. And there's so much here, so much to talk about, so much in meaning imbued in this series that is really hyper-focused like a laser into just a few events and scenes in the series that are so deeply meaningful, so kind of loaded with all kinds of philosophical things, all kinds of reflections of actual realities, of issues that are relevant to us to this day, that to me it blows my mind when you actually see what really is in this series. And I know I could understand some being skeptical because you wouldn't expect to find in a series like this, and I want to be very honest. The appeal of this, perhaps to, you could say, a cultural group, which might be like the people very familiar and invigorated in the African gangster rapper kind of culture. That's not something I'm privy to. I've never really found pleasure in that cultural clique and its ways, so to speak. And I'm not saying this to put them down. I'm saying it to tell you that this series, Afro Samurai, is not of a classification of something that I would normally be drawn to. If it has a scene or a few scenes that are so meaningful that I could see something here that I criticize about it, that I don't like, and yet still be drawn to overall give a very positive view about it, that, in my opinion, is incredibly powerful. That is a testament to the skill of the writer of this series, or the writers. Now, stopping for a moment just to take a quick reminder. If you do enjoy this content, please consider liking the videos and subscribing to my channel. I will be working to produce more content like it, and if you're subscribed, you should get a sort of heads up when a new video is released. As well as, if you have the financial means and it's not too much of a burden, please consider throwing a donation if you can. It definitely helps ease off some of the pressure and helps me to really focus on producing these videos. In the very least, when donations are coming in, I can certainly produce a lot more of them a lot more quickly. But again, this is not expected or demanded, but it is strongly appreciated if you do. Okay, with that said, let's get right into this. I do have some backdrop and background to cover. So again, something to always keep in mind, I have written books before, and I did write a book on certain things I was interested in terms of moral argumentation and thoughts with things I see in anime, that some things I like, some things I don't like, to help explain kind of to maybe cultural elements that don't really appreciate the anime phenomenon, why people are typically drawn into it. I like to function as sort of a bridge builder, because sometimes you have generation gaps, people argue among themselves. I like to reconcile those arguments, help people mutually respect each other. That was my purpose in that book, and I wrote a section on it about Afro Samurai, in which I brought up a lot of things you're going to hear in this video. There are some things I'll leave out, but the reason I'm mentioning this actually is that this is one of the few videos where, in a very real way, I have a script I can follow, because I already put my pen to paper, so to speak, for this series. I do have some quotations I'll be trying to draw from that book. Now, I don't know if that's going to affect the quality of the video, if I'm going to, I might have problems being kind of monologue at times anyways. I try not to be, but all the more so likely to happen when you're just reading quotations. I hope it doesn't happen, but if it does, I hope you'll be somewhat forgiving in the matter. It's not something easy for me to do. The other part is that a lot of the quotations of my book I will be leaving out, or trying to leave out as I read it, which is kind of confusing in its own way, in terms of there's a lot of moral argumentation where unless you read the whole book and understood the whole context, you wouldn't even appreciate it or unappreciate it. Just sound confusing and out of place. It wouldn't make sense in this video. You'd have to do a 2-hour video. I have a particular theme I want to focus, a particular set of events in the series I want to hyper focus on for this. And the whole purpose of the preamble and backdrop is to really help you understand what adversity that component of it had to overcome to have this series stand out to me. Because, again, I want to remind you, I am not at all necessarily a fan, which is putting it lightly, of gangster rap culture kind of things, and I'm not a fan of the excessive vulgarity of it, and a lot of that kind of thing is rather imbued into Afro Samurai. Normally this is not a series you would expect me to do a commentary on, and yet it has something in it hidden that is so valuable it's worth it to me. So let's get into it. So first, I want to give you some of the things that, for me, would normally cause me to write a series like this off as something not appealing to me. And again, I am kind of a guy that's very big on morality and moral themes, and this has nothing to do with holier-than-thou attitude, but just genuinity of heart. There are things I think work for humans and things that don't. Now, I'm not pushing that on anyone here, but to me, it would cause me to filter out an anime like this normally. So how to break into this? First, let me give you the history of the series itself in its own lore. When the series starts, you have young Afro, and he witnesses his father being killed, or rather he's decapitated in a duel. There is story to this. So in this series, they have these headbands, which are apparently based off of a Japanese child's game, but there's probably some deeper meaning in that I could get into very easily. I'll try not to at this time. And basically in this series, they have these headbands that if you get them all or collect them all, kind of imbues godlike powers apparently to the one who obtains them. However, this is not something most characters in the series are privy to. Most characters in the series have this belief that they get these powers if they get just one headband in particular, which is called the number one headband. So the headbands serve very much as a ranking system, and you have to work your way up to be able to challenge the number one, so to speak, to try to obtain the headband. So the reason Afro's father is killed because he is the possessor of the number one headband, and the person who kills him, Justice, is the possessor of the number two headband who's seeking the number one headband. This sets a backdrop for a revenge story. Afro, to him at that point, and possibly a long time later, none of this headband stuff matters. In the eyes of young Afro, that number one headband is non-existent. This is his daddy. You just killed his caretaker, his guide, his provider, right in front of him in cold blood. You took away the one comfort he might have had in life, or one of the few comforts. You just took that away, if you're Justice in that moment. This sets the revenge backdrop, and it's pretty powerful. So as the series progresses, basically immediately in the first episode after this scene, time skips to adult Afro, no longer a child. And I think he already has the number two headband at the point in the story that it skips to, and he's hunting down the holder of the number one headband, Justice. Now here's where there's a lot I don't like in this series, and I want to be vocal about it. In terms of Afro's character as a person, it's rather shallow. He's just kind of single-minded in revenge, and it causes him to deal at times far too brutally with opponents. Think about it this way: a warrior who fights to defend people from exploitation, for instance, in a moral theme, that kind of person is forgiven typically for their use of warfare. But a man with shallow reasons for fighting is not. Afro is not really fighting to overthrow an evil regime in order to set the captives free or to prevent a massacre at all. He's just fighting to get to this one particular person called Justice to kill him. And this brings in a whole depressing theme to the series. A lot of darkness is in this series, and you see it right from the get-go. It's no coincidence that basically the first battle portrayed, it's kind of at nighttime. It sets the whole premise that this is a dark series. Afro fights for himself out of the own bitterness of his heart in the pursuit of revenge. That's his only motivation. So there's not a lot of deep meaning to what Afro himself is doing. And the problem with this is very much this: he's just basically perfectly demonized anyone who hinders him. So if you get in his way as an obstacle, you're likely to just be killed. Afro kind of becomes more of a killing machine. This is something I personally don't like. He just doesn't have a lot of character in that. Though in some ways he might be comparable to Hiroyui from Gundam Wing, albeit quite different at the same hand. In terms of at least the beginning series Hiroyui, kind of that perfect soldier concept, Afro is a perfect killer in a very real way. So again, the vulgarity, the kind of presence of excess profanity in the series, for me, that was another thing that would normally make me not like it. You had a lot of this from the other characters and from Afro's kind of imaginary friend. Not so much from Afro himself. Afro himself almost is soulless in a lot of ways because of what's happened and transpired in his internal character, in his heart. He does not talk much at all. It's basically absolutely minimal speech. And he definitely doesn't really swear. He's what you call the strong silent type. And while they did try to spin some humor in it, at times it really seems out of place. This is just a dark series with almost constant chaos, bloodshed, and killing. And, really a lot of tragedy to it. So you get that scene with the RPG, and they're trying to stick some humor in it, but it comes off as out of place. Now, that's kind of a way to sum it up. It's a bleak world. The attempts to liven up are vain. The motivations for the violence are subpar. And so if I ended it there, I would have been like, I'm not interested in talking about this series. I don't want to deal with it. Well, here's where we move into the meaningful parts. So, again, remember that backdrop, Justice killing his father. This is where all the meaning is imbued, when Afro encounters Justice. Mind you, there is some meaning. Actually, I would add, there is some meaning and interesting things in Afro's battle with Gino, his childhood friend, as well. But the stuff that stood out to me was really Afro versus Justice. So if I'm talking the deep philosophical underpinnings and meanings of this series, it's all imbued into that one fight, Afro versus Justice. It's the same thing in the anime. It's the same thing in the video game. It's the same thing in the manga. They all have this in common. And what you find is, as a series, if you count the three kind of as one series, clarifying itself, it offers very unique philosophical perspectives. Originally, I was going to put a clip from the video game here where Afro faces off against Justice, but it was causing copyright claim issues. So actually, I'll just give you a dialogue reading from Justice's lines in the fight and sort of explain it, and then I'll put alongside some textual explanations of what's actually being implied, which is pretty loaded. So in the video game, Justice is dead already, similar to the manga. Afro gets to him, but unlike the manga, Afro enters into the metaphorical realm of his own heart and his own mind. He enters inside himself, And this is where the spirit of justice lives, and it's here inside himself. He has a final battle with the sort of spiritual remnant of Justice. Justice first says to him when he sees him, "You know where you are, don't you? Of course you do. All this time spent looking for me, you've been looking in the wrong direction, looking out instead of in." After a few brief exchanges in the fight, Justice begins to talk to Afro while they're continuing to fight, and he says, "My desire was to become a god. In the pursuit of revenge, you made me yours. Searching for me, obsessing over me, killing for me. You really think you're the good guy? I killed but a single man in an honorable duel and for a noble purpose. Each life you took was a tribute to me. Your actions gave me substance. Let me live. You've been doing my good work." Once again, after a few more exchanges, Justice continues to speak, and he says to Afro, "You think I made you what you are? Oh no, it was you. You chose this path. You chose to worship me. I just led the way. That's all. You're the son of two fathers, your blood father and me. It's too bad you got your looks from him. He gave you life, but I gave you direction." So what you find with the series is that really it's these scenes that take this series way past being just a cool looking depiction of some bloody, violent fighting with quick, rapid movements, and takes it into the realm of very important philosophical discussions and deep meanings, both in cultural, in terms of commentary on left-wing African American culture in a very real way, but also in general universal stuff for everybody. It offers a philosophical discourse on the battle every single human being of every single disposition faces inside themselves against their own darkness within. The philosophy in Afro versus Justice in that really surpasses race and gender boundaries into a universal conversation, so anyone can relate with it. That's the beauty of it. Now, in my opinion, the anime was far less meaningful than the video game and the manga in this respect. Emphasis should be placed on those two over the anime, and it can be counted as relevant to the book since all are styled the same. Remember, the basis for the series is always the manga. The manga comes first. Well, in the manga, the plot is incredibly different from the anime, for example. In the manga, Afro goes off on his pursuit of hunting Justice to get his revenge, and he never gets to fight Justice at all. By the time he gets to Justice, Justice is already died. His corpse is just there sitting dead on a throne. And his corpse just waiting. It turns into dust as soon as Afro touches it. And that is deeply meaningful. Consider this as the philosophical deep meanings for a revenge narrative. Afro gets to Justice, he's already dead. There's zero satisfaction for the event. In fact, in the manga, it's very different from the anime. Afro was traumatized after he realized Justice had already died, and he enters into a vegetative state for some time after the moment. And by the time he's mentally recovered, his hair is completely unkempt and he's grown a large beard. The video game was very different. It was imaged after the manga, more closely than the anime, but it contained a unique spin. In the video game, the same thing happens. Afro gets to Justice, and Justice is a corpse. Justice is already dead. However, it doesn't end there. Immediately after this in the video game, Afro is sucked into the metaphorical realm of his own inner person, of his own heart and his own mind. Here inside of himself, Justice, killer of his father, lives on. It's here inside his own heart, inside his own mind, that he, Afro, fights against Justice, and Justice speaks to him numerous times during the battle, and the dialogue is very, very impactful and very, very meaningful. So in this sense, this series has really tapped into a substantial philosophical reality, which is made all the more incredible when the target audience is concerned. So, for example, you consider the African American cultural element and cultural commentary involved. Justice is made to look like this, racist white Southerner type of guy, just like the haunting image of the past slave masters in a very real way. And what really happens, and you see this in the narrative of the dialogue that Justice gives in the video game, in the battle, Afro's life gets hijacked by this hatred that Justice has imbued into him. In a very similar way, you can say it's a commentary in that cultural perspective. The African Americans' hatred of that those past colonial white guy oppressor type of image, when they are still operating with that in the modern time, and in some contexts where it actually isn't applicable, they get hijacked by this sort of demonic haunting spirit of the past, and they start losing out on things. In a similar way, Afro, you think of all the relationships he could have formed. He could have had a wife, a family, kids, and all that got sacrificed in order to pursue unsatisfying revenge. There is a cultural relationship here. I put it in the notes, but again, it's no coincidence that the adversary of Afro is called Justice, and that a lot of the radical sort of like Black Lives Matter movements are so obsessed with something they call social justice, and this concept of being owed radical reparations from what they would call the white people, and yet sometimes getting carried in a way of spirit. No amount of reparations ever seem to be enough, and sometimes for the most extreme elements of them, those most caught in hatred, what they really would probably want is just extermination. Now, I'm not saying they all think that way. It's not meant to be a cover-all title for that culture, but it's a commentary at least on those elements of it, and that's very fascinating. And now it stretches into a universal meaning, and it's still applicable. Like, me, I have nothing to do with African American gangster rap culture, yet this is something I can easily relate to or apply to. This concept of an inner battle where Afro's fighting Justice. Well, have you ever had someone who hurt you in the past, who belittled you, who in essence left you this haunting image and memory in your mind, and they're kind of living rent-free in your head, and you keep torturing yourself over and over with this, and it's as if this spirit is trying to hijack you to get you emotionally moved to punch out someone who it probably is unrelated to the event, trying to give you this false promise that you will feel empowered if you take out your anger on someone or something like that. These are the meanings that are very much emanating out of this, and it's very obvious that they're directly implicated, and that is exactly what the author of this manga, the creators of this series, have set to lay out as a message. And for me, that is fantastic. It left me with questions when I saw what was going on. I was shocked because I was asking this in my head. Did they actually plan it all out to the most minute detail like this? Or were they kind of doing it subconsciously? Because I have seen these two styles, and I have seen these manifest in people's creativity in terms of their art and their writing. Some people, they have a passion. They just want to do some kind of art. It's based on something they kind of just liked in their head. They don't even know why they like it. They're not fully cognizant or self-aware about it. They've never asked the question. And they go and form something, and sometimes it has an absolutely kind of accurate picture of a spiritual or eternal truth or some kind of cultural or moral principle in it, but the person writing it is not necessarily in any way self-aware. This could be the case, though given the refinement of the presentation that occurs in this series, I would assume that probably some amount of this was done with forethought and intent, but I'm not 100% sure. So this is what I kind of was talking about earlier when I'm saying this series was one of the things where, with the philosophical elements it employed, and when I noticed it, it had the potential, and it really did have the effect for kind of leaving me just staring blankly, dumbfounded with kind of awe, because this is very high level writing. To do this is not like, I don't think this is kind of normal writing per se. I think this is the type of writing that comes out of someone who's extremely meditative and thoughtful. So I was just blown away. Absolutely amazing. So again, you might not expect to find that in a series like this, but though it is subtle, though it is kind of disguised, those kind of themes are there. Now with that all said, this concludes my commentary on the Afro Samurai manga, anime, and game series. Now, just again, a reminder that if you found this content enjoyable, please consider subscribing to my channel. It's much appreciated. And again, if you wish to donate, I do have a page for that, and you can find it in a hyperlink in the description. Thank you very much. God bless you, and I hope you have a great day.